It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce Bill Johnston, who kindly agreed to have this virtual conversation with me, especially for our poetry evening with Tomasz Różycki held at the University of Oxford in June. And Bill is professor of comparative literature at Indiana University and a very prominent translator of Polish literature in the United States. He has translated numerous titles which span over a few centuries, ranging from Polish Renaissance through the early 19th century Romanticism up to modern and contemporary works. And among others, Bill also translated Tomasz Różycki. His, should I say, epic or digressive poem, 12 Stations. And this translation was released literally a few weeks ago, if I'm not wrong, by Zephyr Press. Bill, so maybe we can start with a very personal question. Could you tell us what drew your attention to Tomasz Różycki as the poet you'd like to translate? And secondly, what made you choose this particular work by him? And was it somehow also related to your ongoing project of translating the Polish canonical romantic epic Pan Tadeusz, so Sir Thaddeus, to which 12 translations in so many instances allude?
Right. Well, first of all, yeah, it wasn't Pan Tadeusz. That idea came later. Mm-hmm. I first heard about Tomasz Różycki. I think the first conversation I can remember having was among Polish friends here in Bloomington when Dwanaście stacji, 12 stations, first came out. People had started reading it. They were very enthusiastic, and when I was in Poland, I picked up a copy and was completely overwhelmed by this amazing book. I'd never read anything like it. And very soon after that, Mira Rosenthal came to Indiana University, and she was already working on Różycki's lyric poetry. And so I did quite a lot of workshopping of his lyric work with Mira as she was beginning her project, and kind of got to know him that way. And Mira was very comfortable with the lyric poetry. She felt that 12 Stations contained too much cultural information for her comfort level at that stage in her own learning. And long story short, I ended up translating part of the text, and we looked for a publisher, and eventually Zephyr Press took it on. So that's pretty much how that happened, I think.
Right, so as you already mentioned, the book is full of cultural references and geographically specific descriptions. Did you perhaps consult Tomasz Różycki about any of them and about potential solutions in English, or did you decide to rely on your own creative reading? Because as a translation scholar, you teach your students about how literary translation can be a very creative act. Do you think that this assumption was also reflected in the way you yourself approach this particular text?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe that translation is a creative act. At the same time, I think translators it's a particular kind of creative work, because translators are attached to a source text in a way that a novelist or poet isn't. So yes, there was a lot of my own creative work went into the translation, but I also consulted a great deal with Tomasz Różycki. He came to visit. We spent several hours over a couple of days going over different points in the translation. There were some things that, some cultural details that I needed help with or wasn't sure about. But I also needed his permission, in a sense, to stray a little from the letter of the translation. So one example that comes to mind is that there's a point where he describes, I think, the grandson doing something heroic, and he compares him to Asterisk and Hercules and Theseus, and then he says Kapitan Klos. And this, of course, is a very nice juxtaposition in the Polish. Kapitan Klos is this heroic figure from a TV series, but it means nothing in English translation. And I guess one solution would be to use a footnote or something like that, but in the spirit of the poem, that one could use a different point of reference that would perhaps be equally funny for an English language reader, an American reader, for example. And so I asked Tomasz if it was okay to replace Kapitan Kloss with something else, and he said it was. He agreed that was in the spirit of the poem, and but then it was up to me to come up with something suitable. So I wasn't asking him what to put in there. I was simply asking for his okay. Mm-hmm. And so that happened at a number of points in the poem where there was some creative work required to get over something that was simply too Polish. But I guess the other point at which we consulted was a broader issue of language, and that was the question of the lineation of the poem. It's constructed, as you know, in these very long flowing lines in Polish, and my translation matches the original line for line. I kind of liked the idea, like for example, the German translation was significantly longer, and I kind of liked the idea, perhaps just for my own, as a challenge to present to myself of keeping the length of the poem. It was also very important, it seemed to me important that that Różycki had varied where the sentence endings are. So sometimes the lines are end stopped, but in many cases he uses enjambment, but in a very varied way, so that the sentences, the sentence endings fall at different points. And that variety helps to really create the rhythm of reading, to help the reader along the narrative. And I checked with him that this was what he was doing, and he said yes, that was very important to him. And so that confirmation allowed me to go ahead with the English and try and find equivalents. It wasn't always possible to end the sentences in exactly the same place, obviously. But the fact that they were varied was very important, and so I worked a lot on trying to create the same rhythm and cadence of the poetry as you find in the original.
I really like this idea of collaboration with the poet, and also you mentioned in your correspondence that along with Tomasz you spent the last few weeks promoting the book in the United States. So could you tell us how it's been received so far, and what do you think can appeal to the American reader, or in general the Anglophone reader?
The reception has been very positive so far. We did a reading at the conference of AWP, the Association of Writing Programs, which is a big creative writing conference here in the US, and there was a sizable crowd and a sizable line of people wanting to buy the book and get a signature afterwards, and that was very gratifying. One never quite knows what it is that appeals about a book to individual readers, and it may be different things to different people. I would imagine so. But I think people were drawn to the lightness of the text, but also its richness and its complexity. It's extremely readable, at least in the Polish. I hope my English is the same. But I think people like to read something which is easily accessible, but clearly has great depths as well. My guess is that the American readers are drawn to slightly different things in the translation. Poles are in the original. I think a lot of the cultural detail probably will escape the American reader, the details of Silesians and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, for example, there's a beautiful description of making pierogi, and that went down very well when we read that particular section. And I think the reason is that Różycki tells the story of how to make pierogi from literally the viewpoint of a small child. and you can actually picture the kitchen from a height of, you know, about four, what would it be, a meter 50 or something, looking up at all of the things that are going on, all of the preparations which are being made. And I think that that universality is quite palpable, and I think it comes through in the translation. I think there are other things in the translation that I'm curious to know whether American readers pick up on them. There's a lot of kind of philosophical content, which is disguised as humor. It's disguised as mock philosophy, where he writes about traveling by train, for example, as being the experience of moving into another world, or almost like death. I think those passages are important to Różycki, and I would like to think that they are also quite accessible to non-Polish readers. That I actually don't know, of course. But we haven't had reviews yet, and I'm very curious to see what reviewers will write about the poem. But certainly those people who've attended the readings have been very enthusiastic. I've known a few people who have subsequently read the book and have absolutely loved it. And I'm hoping that we'll have more of that.
Okay. Well, I bet that our audience in Oxford will be even more encouraged now to read Różycki's book in your translation.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me. I'm sorry that I can't be there on this occasion. I hope you have a wonderful reading. Tomasz is a great reader. I'm very grateful to Antonia for taking over. And I wish you a very pleasant event.